Today, I'm going to discuss the case of Sky Metalwala. Compared to many of the other cases I discuss, Sky's case is much more well-known, so it's very likely that, especially if you live in Washington State, you have heard of this child. However, I hope that some part of this video will teach you something you didn't know before, or give you an idea of what to keep an eye out for if you do live in that area of the world. Before I get started, I just wanted to say that if you are interested in true crime content, specifically content revolving around missing children, and you would like to stay up to date with those sorts of issues, then please think about subscribing, because that is what this entire channel is dedicated to. Without further ado, let's get into the case of Sky Metalwala. Sky is biracial. Specifically, a mix of Asian and Caucasian descents. His mother is Ukrainian, while his father is Pakistani. Sky was born on September 9, 2009, although some agencies list his birthday as October 6, 2009. This would make him 2 when he went missing, regardless of which birthday you refer to. But before I get into the details of Sky's disappearance, I think it's important to first take a look at Sky's parents. Julia V. Biryakova, and I'm sorry if I butchered that, was born in Russia in 1982, but is a Ukraine native. Julia claimed that as a child, she had been exposed to shock therapy in mental hospitals as a punishment for her behavior. She also claimed that she went through regular disciplinary beatings by her parents, which resulted in very low self-esteem. In 1994, Julia emigrated from the Ukraine to the US, and in 1997, 15-year-old Julia met 21-year-old Solomon Metalwala in a service station. At the time, Solomon was doing well for himself because he was running a successful convenience store in Seattle's Pioneer Square neighborhood. Solomon invited Julia to a party during their initial conversation, and the two struck up a romantic relationship shortly afterwards, despite their age difference. In 1999, Julia graduated from Bellevue High School and became a naturalized U.S. citizen in the same year. Shortly after her graduation, Julia and Solomon bought and moved into a condominium located in Bellevue, Washington. There was immediately friction in their relationship. Police were actually called when the couple was seen arguing loudly at a gas station over simple evening plans. When the police questioned them, Solomon said that his name was Suleiman Metalwala, who is supposedly actually his brother. Julia later told a clinical psychologist that at this point in the relationship, she was aware that Solomon could be very controlling and that she was emotionally dependent on him, but their relationship persisted. Julia worked at Solomon's convenience store, which meant that the couple spent almost all of their time together. The store brought in good money, and from the outside looking in, it looked like this young couple was doing very well for themselves. In 2003, Julia and Solomon got married in a small, informal ceremony that was supposedly held in Solomon's mother's kitchen. Julia later claimed the marriage had been rushed and somewhat forced upon her by Solomon's family, who claimed that she had to marry him or never see him again as he was facing deportation for unknown reasons. Julia claimed that she didn't tell her family this reason for marrying him until 2010. In 2005, Solomon converted to Christianity, and to this day, he says that his religion plays a pivotal role in his life. Julia, whose religious affiliations are unknown, claimed her in-laws blamed her for Solomon's conversion, which put a strain on her relationships with her in-laws and, in turn, strained her relationship with Solomon. 2 years later, in 2007, the couple began to financially struggle because a competitor of their convenience store opened nearby, causing Solomon to lose many of his customers. Very shortly after this, the Great Recession hit, and despite these issues, the family bought a home for over $800,000, the cost of which was then added to the mortgage payments they still had to make on their Bellevue residence. In short, their finances were in shambles. Around the same time, Julia gave birth to their first child, Miley. It was shortly after the girl's birth that Julia began to obsessively clean their residences and have a crippling fear of germs, which resulted in her neglecting both herself and her infant in favor of cleaning their house. Julia was subsequently diagnosed with obsessive-compulsive disorder and prescribed medication to cope with her issues. However, in 2009, when Julia found out that she was pregnant with her second child, Sky, she stopped taking this medication, against her doctor's orders. This time, the OCD came back worse than ever, now accompanied with depression. During this time, lenders were starting to foreclose both of the family's properties, and they had failed to pay many of their bills. As a result, they had to move out of the expensive home located in Kirkland, Washington, and back into their smaller Bellevue condo. Solomon claimed that during this transition, Julia's OCD forced him to take the children out of the house to eat to avoid contaminating the cleaned house, as she feared the germs that food would bring in. According to Solomon, Julia also made him sleep on the floor frequently so he wouldn't mess up the newly made bed. The family was cited several times for violating noise regulations because of Julia's late-night cleaning habits, such as vacuuming at near midnight. In December 2009, the Metalwalas were cited for reckless endangerment because they left Sky, who was only 3 months old at the time, unattended in their car on a 27-degree Fahrenheit day while they shopped in Target for almost an hour. They later claimed to police that Sky had been sleeping, so they didn't want to wake him, and that they were only in the Target for 20 minutes, but security footage disproved this. As punishment, the Metalwalas were forced to take parenting classes, do community service, and spend a year on probation. After they met these requirements, the case was dismissed. Although, during the course of this investigation, both parents admitted to leaving both of the children alone for periods of time. Remember that, it's going to come up later. In March 2010, on Julia's 29th birthday, she was admitted into a psychiatric hospital. This would be the first of 3 mental hospital stays Julia would go through, and this first time was spurred on by her confession to Solomon that she had dreams of strangling their young children to death. Despite Julia's obvious issues, the psychiatrist who completed her evaluation concluded that her condition would not hinder her abilities as a mother. I have to wonder if the psychiatrist didn't have the full picture, or if he was just genuinely that bad at his job. During Julia's 3rd check-in to a mental institution, the family's condo was foreclosed, and Solomon moved with their children to his parents' home in Kirkland. Julia and Solomon separated in 2010. I didn't see a clear or specific reason for their separation, but based on all of their prior issues and Julia's worsening mental health, it's not hard to imagine why they might have wanted a divorce. The divorce in question was particularly nasty, and both sides accused the other of abuse. Both also sought protective orders against each other. Solomon claimed Julia had told him of dreams she had about killing their children, which matches up with the story that got her admitted to the first psychiatric hospital. However, Julia made very serious allegations against Solomon, which resulted in the court forbidding him to have any contact with his children. This was because they were investigating the claims and wanted to make sure that he couldn't hurt the children if the claims were true. As it would later turn out, their worry was directed at the wrong parent, and these claims were later ruled unfounded. By the time this ruling was passed, however, it was too late. Solomon hadn't seen either of his children for almost a year before Sky's disappearance. Throughout the divorce, Solomon used Julia's mental illnesses against her, and Julia claimed that Solomon had anger issues and was verbally and physically abusive to her. She also made multiple allegations, as I mentioned earlier, that he was abusive towards their children, but, as I also mentioned earlier, these claims were later ruled unfounded, with no evidence to support them. During the proceedings, Julia offered to forego both alimony and child support if Solomon would allow her to move to Arizona with the children, but he refused. I'm not sure if this is because of his deep-seated care for his children, or that he didn't want to see his wife win in any way that he classified as winning. With that long and messy background information, it's now time to talk about Sky's disappearance. The 2-year-old went missing on November 6, 2011, from Bellevue, Washington. Julia claimed that that morning, Sky woke up sick, so she drove him and his 4-year-old sister to the Overlake Hospital Medical Center. At the time, Julia did not have her own car, so she used her brother's silver 1998 Acura. She didn't take her phone, purse, or wallet with her for the drive. Julia then claimed that the car ran out of gas in the 2600 block of 112th Avenue Northeast. Julia then said she left Sky strapped into his car seat, left the car unlocked, took Sky's older sister, and walked to a Chevron gas station that was located a mile away. When Julia arrived at the station, she called a friend rather than buying gas because, as it was later discovered, she didn't have a gas can either at home or in the car. And then Julia waited for the friend to pick her and her daughter up and drop her back off at the car. When Julia and her friend arrived at the Acura, about an hour had passed after she had left it, and Sky was gone. Julia called the police at 9:50 a.m. to report her son's disappearance, and Solomon was contacted with the awful news sometime before noon. Witnesses in the area said that they'd seen the car parked sometime between 8 and 10 a.m., and nobody had seen a child in it at any time. Because of this, and because of some other details that will come to light later, it is possible that Sky went missing sometime before the 9:50 call to police, and that his mother just failed to report his disappearance until that time. Initial investigation in a 20-block radius of the car turned up no clues other than a toddler's shoe, but the authorities later confirmed the shoe did not belong to Sky. Upon reaching the car, police discovered that the vehicle hadn't run out of gas and in fact had 2.2 gallons left in the tank. The car also had no mechanical problems. It started as soon as they put the keys in the ignition. So Julia had parked a fully working car, left it unlocked, and then abandoned her toddler son for some reason. Like I said, she didn't even have a gas can with her or in the car, so she would have known full well that she wouldn't have been able to get gas at the station and that it would have been a pretty long time before she could return to Sky. Immediately, Julia did her best to make herself look as suspicious as possible. She refused to take a polygraph test or speak directly to police about her son's disappearance, although admittedly she did allow them to search her car, home, and computer. In fact, Julia immediately got an attorney and has only ever communicated with both the police and the public through this attorney. The rest of Sky's family, including his father and extended family members, cooperated heavily with the investigation. Solomon especially has been spearheading efforts to try to find his son, and he has remained active in the search for Sky for years after the disappearance. Solomon agreed to taking a lie detector test, but the test came back inconclusive. He took a second test, and the results of that test have not been released to the public. However, I don't think this inconclusive and then concealed results necessarily mean anything, because lie detector tests are notoriously inaccurate. On the Sunday following Sky's disappearance, police set up a 5-hour roadblock where they stopped every car to ask them about Sky. Through this process, they gathered about a dozen new tips that went nowhere at all. That, too, will be a theme throughout this case. Investigators later learned that nobody besides Julia had actually laid eyes on Sky for at least a 2-week period leading up to his disappearance, and possibly for much longer than 2 weeks. But that wasn't uncommon because Julia frequently isolated herself in her home with her children for extended periods of time. Julia was also known by friends and family members alike for habitually leaving her children alone in the house. The day before Sky's disappearance, she left both children, a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old, I remind you, alone in her house for 11 hours, while she, ironically, went through a lengthy mediation session regarding child custody in the context of her pending divorce. This session decided that Julia would have sole custody of the children, while Solomon would retain visitation rights, but less than a day later, Julia called her attorney and claimed that she'd changed her mind. claiming that she had been strong-armed into the agreement. For context, the divorce had pretty much been finalized a few days before Skye's disappearance, to the best of my understanding, but the custody battle was ongoing. This is important because too often we see children used as leverage between parents getting a divorce. After Skye's disappearance, the system seemed to realize that it had messed up big time, and Skye's older sister was taken into protective custody and placed into a foster home. She was unfortunately too young to be helpful to the investigation, and the only thing she could tell police was that her brother had been in the car that morning. However, many online sleuths have pointed out that children can very easily be coerced or coached into saying whatever their parents want them to say, so this should be taken with a grain of salt. Initially, Solomon was allowed twice-weekly supervised visitation rights of Skye's sister, and after 6 weeks, he got custody of his daughter. It was discovered that Miley had been heavily scarred by her time with her mother, who would say very disturbing things in front of her children. Her daughter parroted what she had heard and regularly told her father, at the age of 4, I remind you, that she wanted to kill herself. Later, it was found that Julia had posted on seekingarrangements.com, which is a website dedicated to connecting sugar babies and sugar daddies. She claimed that she was seeking financial stability in the form of $3,000 to $5,000 in cash each month. It's unclear whether anyone ever stepped forward or took that bait. In March 2012, Solomon got sole custody of both of the children. Given Julia's past behavior, she did not even get visitation rights. If Skye is ever found, Solomon would be his only caretaker. After Skye's disappearance, Julia became romantically involved with a man named Alan J. Morgan and ultimately married him in December 2014. Their relationship was also not healthy, and there were several incidents of recorded domestic abuse. The same month as their marriage, Julia filed a no-contact order against Morgan after he assaulted her. Morgan was later jailed for violating that no-contact order, but he continued to violate that order by calling her at least a dozen times from jail. However, Julia also violated that order by visiting him several times in the prison while under a different name. Documents also show that Julia initiated more than 70 phone calls to Morgan while he was imprisoned. Alan Morgan had previously lived in Florida and had actually already lost custody of a child there. He had been previously convicted for violence against police officers, domestic violence, multiple assaults, drug usage, and willful cruelty. Morgan was ultimately released from jail on October 15th and ordered to go through drug and alcohol treatment, but a warrant for his arrest was issued on November 5th because he left treatment and failed to report back to the Issaquah jail that was handling his rehabilitation. In July of 2015, Julia gave birth to Morgan's son. Staff at the hospital helping her deliver the baby immediately reported the child to Child Protective Services, citing concerns about the mother's mental health. During the CPS investigation, Julia and Morgan claimed that they had never lived together, but both gave the same apartment address because they're idiots. Later, Julia started using a P.O. box and then changed her address to homeless. She also indicated that she didn't know who the father of her child was, despite Morgan's name being clearly listed on the birth certificate and the infant's middle name being James, just like Morgan's middle name. CPS argued that both parents were unfit, and most sources drop off after that CPS statement, so I'm not 100% sure where the child is now, but I did find one source claiming that the child had been taken from Julia and given to her mother. Personally, this doesn't sit right with me, but a lot of things about CPS don't sit right with me, and I don't have time to get into it all now. Bellevue police took this increased scrutiny on Julia as a chance to plead with Julia to talk to them about Skye's disappearance, but once again, she was zero help. After this debacle, Julia claimed to be living with her mother in Issaquah, Washington. Do you see the issue? Do you see the issue if Julia lost custody of her child and the child was then supposedly given to her mother, who Julia now lives with? I did find one article discussing Miley, Skye's older sister. At the time, she was 12 years old and still living with Solomon, who described her as being smart, adventurous, and engaged. Solomon has tried asking her about Skye, but unfortunately, she remembers nothing. There aren't very many theories surrounding this case, mainly because to pretty much everyone, law enforcement included, it is very obvious who is responsible for Skye's disappearance. The only thing that people debate is how Skye disappeared, not who is behind it. I'm going to go over a few of those ideas now, some statements made by officials and by people close to the family. Strangely enough, Julia's description of her son's disappearance shares remarkable similarities with an episode of Law & Order Special Victims Unit that had been rebroadcast in the Seattle area the night before Skye's disappearance. In the show, a young couple accidentally killed their child and buried him, then claimed he had been abducted when their parked car was stolen. Now, there are similarities, yes, but you could argue that this is just a coincidence. After all, with all of the TV available to us and all of the shows, all of the true crime shows especially, it's very likely that Julia didn't even know this episode existed, except for the fact that Solomon said it was her favorite show while they were married. So, there's that. Solomon, of course, entirely believes Julia was responsible for their son's disappearance and does believe that their custodial dispute over the children affected her actions. Solomon thinks that Skye is still alive, and that Julia gave Skye to someone to hide him. Even because of this, no suspects have been officially named in Skye's case, although the investigation has obviously focused primarily on Julia because of the bizarre circumstances surrounding the case, and the even weirder lack of cooperation from the child's own mother. Although Julia has relatives in Russia and Solomon has relatives in Pakistan, authorities believe that Skye is still in Washington state, either dead or alive. Solomon later claimed that he had been looking through Skye's medical records to try to get an idea of the child's health. He had been so disconnected from his children that he didn't even have that basic information. Because of this, he started broadening his search to people who had seen Skye prior to his disappearance. These two things combined made Solomon realize that nobody except for a neighbor had seen Skye since April of 2011, which is when he had a doctor's appointment. This was 7 months before Julia reported him missing, and this means that Skye could have gone missing way before that call to police. Solomon claims that Julia's father visited Seattle from the Ukraine in that April, and he now wonders if Skye's grandfather took the child back to Ukraine with him. I'm trying to imagine how he might do that without a record existing of it, because I'm not sure if Julia's father took a boat or a plane, and I'm not familiar with the regulations on an international boat voyage, but I do live in America, and I am familiar with the plane regulations, and there's no way in hell some random old dude could take some random toddler onto a plane without proper identification for both of those people. Solomon also claims that during the year that he was not allowed to see his children, Julia emailed him asking for his permission to take the kids to the Ukraine. It really seemed like she just wanted to get the children away from him and away from Washington state to somewhere where she could control and subsequently neglect them. Solomon's lawyer is Leslie Clay Terry. Terry claims that Julia, Julia's brother, and 2 of Julia's close friends appear to be concealing information about the case in order to protect Julia. He claims that all of these people have been interviewed by the police, but they haven't been as forthcoming as Solomon or have spoken to the public. Terry also claims that he personally believes Julia unintentionally killed Skye through her neglect, and then disposed of his body, just like in the SVU episode, so he was never in the car that morning. As of 2017, the FBI, the Bellevue Police Department, and the Redmond Police Department have pursued more than 2,500 tips, spent over 14,000 hours, and spent over $2 million searching for Skye, with no results. In May of 2017, an aged-up photo of Skye was released, but unfortunately nothing came from that either. Julia ultimately has not been charged with child endangerment because nobody can technically prove she left Skye alone in the vehicle, since her word obviously isn't enough to go off of. Furthermore, if Skye's body was ever found and Julia was already convicted of child endangerment, it would be very difficult to then charge her with murder. Before ending this video, I wanted to go over some of my personal thoughts. As you may have gathered through small comments I've made here and there, this case infuriates me. I don't think anyone did a good job with this case. I think that this child's life was severely mishandled from the day he was born, and that he didn't truly have anyone looking out for him. Now, I know many people are going to say, well, Solomon was there. Solomon was looking out for him. Solomon cared about him, and that is true. It is very obvious that Solomon loves his children and cares for them deeply. But Solomon also seems like he was a troubled man in his own right when Skye was a child. We all have our struggles, whether it be with mental health, addiction, whatever. But Solomon left his child in a car for almost an hour when it was freezing outside. We cannot forget that. I don't care if Julia also did that. Solomon was there. Solomon was an adult. He could have stopped that. And then for the system to just let them continue raising these two children after they had shown such serious signs of neglect. And then for the system to let Julia have sole custody rights of her children after her 3 stints in a mental health hospital, one of which was because she wanted to kill her children, or at least had fantasized in her dreams about killing her children. I understand that the courts don't want to separate families. I do. I really do get that. And I understand where that reasoning is coming from. But in this case, it is very likely that Skye would still be alive today if he had been removed from the situation and if his parents had been scrutinized just a little more closely. I struggle with mental illness, and I can say with full confidence that my mental illness would never cause me to cause the disappearance of my own child and then not cooperate with police about it. That is disgusting, and Julia is genuinely just a terrible person. I know I sound harsh, but it gets under my skin so much when there are cases like this that receive attention. They receive funding. This is a right that so many missing children do not have. As we can see with my previous videos, so many of those children didn't get any of this. They didn't get funding. They didn't get articles written about them. They didn't get 5-year, 6-year, 8-year checkups into how their cases were. They were written down in NamUs and forgotten. Skye gets all of this funding, and his mother does not cooperate with police to try to find him, and he is still missing. His dad is out there. He doesn't know where his child is. He has his daughter, which I'm sure is amazing to have her. I'm sure he's very thankful for that, but he doesn't have his son. He doesn't even know if Skye is alive or dead. And Julia's just chilling. Like, she doesn't care. She's not cooperating with police. She's not saying anything. I did want to interject real quick before I forget. Getting an attorney and not wanting to talk directly to police, that's not an issue in of itself. There have been many cases of police mishandling cases, making people seem guilty, falsely imprisoning people, what have you. And personally, I would suggest that if you are ever being questioned by police, just get an attorney. In this case, though, if you have an attorney, use that attorney to then try and help find your child. Help the people who are trying to find your missing 2-year-old child. I can't believe this woman. I genuinely can't. It baffles my mind. I'm not even a mother, and I can't imagine doing this to my own child. I'm sure there are a million other things I could say. I could go on for hours about this. It infuriates me. This one gets under my skin in a way that a lot of them haven't, in a way that a lot of them haven't in a really long time. But I'm just going to cut it off there. Those are my personal thoughts. I understand that I'm harsh. I understand that I'm mean towards Julia. But until that woman gives me a reason to think she was not involved in her son's disappearance, I'm going to think she was involved in her son's disappearance. And, quick disclaimer, this is all my opinion. You should be able to very clearly tell when I'm being sarcastic, when it's my opinion versus facts of the case, that sort of thing. But I did want to throw that out there. This section is obviously my opinion and mine alone. At the time of his disappearance, Skye stood at 2 feet 10 inches tall and weighed 28 pounds. Those numbers were sort of heartbreaking to see, especially after covering many older teenagers or young adults, because it reminds me how young Skye was, how much of his life he had before him. At the time of his disappearance, he was wearing a gray or green hooded sweatshirt, aqua and black striped Carter sweatpants with an elastic waistband, and white socks. As I mentioned, he was biracial, mixed with Asian and Caucasian descent, and he had black hair and brown eyes. Please, if you have any information on this case, if you, by some miracle, are connected to Julia's friends or family at all, if they've said something, if you've seen a child that seems kind of strange, if you live in the Washington State area, if you have heard anything, please contact one of the phone numbers or the emails in the description below. There's a community of people who want this child to be found, and we cannot let the apathy, the uncaring nature of a single woman destroy this child's future. Or at least destroy the family he has left who care about him. So please, if you have any information, contact the numbers and the emails in the description below. Please help bring this missing child home.